Hey, how you doing? Okay, the next section we're going in is called gains in space versus potential weak squares. So let's edit the board. We'll put a board editor in. Clear the board. And we're gonna just do this. Let's do this. Okay, this is called this is what they were talking about right here. Pawns protect squares. This is obvious. This seems obvious, but it's sometimes it's something that needs to be basically pondered and appreciated, since many players forget that as pawns advance, the potential amount of squares they control diminish. So when they advance, they lose. They lose. Like if you move a pawn to d3, let's say d3, right? And we're just going to say he moves here and you move here. Now these squares have become weak. Those have actually ended up becoming weak. They're no longer guarded. So that's an idea that we're talking about. This means that players push his pawns and gain more space. More space gains more space, and more space with them. He is also potentially leaving weakened squares in their wake. So we got to see if you go d3 and f3, it leaves e3, g3, and c3 vulnerable. No longer are those protected. The e pawn potentially controls all of the x's. So yeah, the e pawn does. Then it loses control the more it gets pushed. So like this this pawn right here controls this here, but it lost control of these two squares by moving that. It lost control of that. This controls these two squares, but it lost the potential for protection of that square on c2. So that's what they're talking about here. And then if you push the e pawn, it loses control. It gains control of this, but you know what the interesting thing is? It doesn't lose control of those two things, the f and the d3. So this is a good move. That's why you have to always think about when you push a pawn, does it lose control of positional squares? E3 then loses control of d and f. If it's moved to e3, it already lost the potential d3, d4, f3, and f4. So this right here was potentially a square that it could have controlled, but when it moved here, it actually lost all these squares, all those. It lost these squares here for basically protecting or attacking. In general, the other pawns can take up the slack created by the advance of the e pawn. For example, pushing e2 to e4 gives up control of d3, d4, f3, and f4. But the c2 pawn will take over the defense of d2 or d3 and d3 and d4, while the g pawn takes over the defense of g3 and g4. However, if white goes for a big pawn center via c2 to c4, d2 to d4, and e2 to e4, the pawn's control over d3 and d4 is forever lost. It's these lost squares that can and often do fall into the enemy hands when a player, failing to recognize the pitfall and the diminished when they are their pitfall of so if they're not, so the pitfalls of not planning out what will happen far enough in advance, you can actually fall into a big problem. Pawn advances, grabbing too much space for his own good. So sometimes if you grab too much space for your own good, I'm going to annotate the following game in a very strange variation of with that basically variance will be ignored and commentate. And he's going to commentate Jeremy Silman as to whether a move is good or bad. Also, I'll pass over. Instead, I'm going to basically concentrate on 3 squares: c5, d3, and f4. How white pawns move ultimately give them up. So how white pawns move ultimately give them up, and how black's pieces and pawns are fighting for these squares. This is a Capablanca game, so we're going to be setting up a potential game now. I know that was kind of a mouthful for me. I appreciate your patience if it kind of sounded a little bit muddled there for a little bit. It was just I was trying to get all the words right. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to get down, is what words are to be said. But trust me, when you do and you use them in your game, it'll be so worth it, my friends. Let's get the kings. I have to give each side castling rights because I don't think either side has moved their king, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just check this here. Alright, let's give them each castle queen side and castle king side rights. And it's white to move here. Wait a second. Could I have actually... Hold on. I think I... Oh, drat. I think I could have set this... Let's just go to the studies. I think we can set this up without having to even set up the board. I didn't think about that. Good thing we checked that. let's do it to it. Kappa is white and his opponent is black. Okay, the E pawn has soared past D3 and F4, leaving only the C2 to care for D3 and G2 to basically take care of F4. So this pawn here and the D pawn will take care of these two squares here. C5, B4, so he takes B4. One of the guardians of the C5, one of the guards of C5, the B pawn, has already fallen. So this pawn here has fallen. A3, B takes A, and bishop takes. D6. Knight F3. Knight C6. D4. G6. H4. Bishop G4. C3. It's important at the moment, but D3 square is permanently barren of protection of any white pawns. So D3 here doesn't have any protected white pawns. Bishop G8, Knight BD7, Knight F6, Queen B3, Queen B6, Queen A, Bishop takes, G takes F. And we get this position here. There goes the F4 square. Now both D3 and F4 abandoned by white's pawns are on their own. So these two squares here are both abandoned from white. On their own. It's up to the pieces to defend them. Though such strong units are never particularly happy playing a role of defense. Knight H5. The knight shows that it's aware of the F4 square and it's going to try to pile in there. Knight to C4, Queen C8, Bishop C1, and the bishop promises F4 that it will neither be alone nor forgotten. So this F4 square is saying to the F4 square, don't worry, my friend. The square F4, I will not abandon you. You are, I'm here for your protection, basically. This bishop's like a superhero for the F4 square. So castles, Rook B1, King H8, Bishop to H3, B6, Bishop G4, Knight F6, Knight E3. Because now the knight can, because this knight's not here anymore, it moved here, this knight can actually swing there. H5, Bishop to H3. You're probably wondering why the knight didn't take here. Of course, you see that there's two potential ways of handling it. There's taking here, which connects everything and makes the pawn structure okay and in one piece, so that's strong. There's also, if takes here, there's this knight takes too, but I don't think it's as strong as pawn takes, because the knight can easily be kicked away with h5 at that point. So I'm thinking this is actually the strongest move. It stops this pawn move. Well, it could still be played. You still could play this here, and then you take, and then queen to e2, and that pawn's lost. So this should be h3. Knight to a5. Bishop d2. Bishop h6. Black reminds his opponent that his desire for f4 is still burning bright in this scenario, so he has to remember that he wants to get to f4, but it's going to take a little bit of time to do so. Rook to c1, king h7, and then c4. This is a really interesting knight g8 was played. You're thinking, whoa, hello, what about this, right? All right, here, and then there's rook check, and this actually loses a piece, because if knight here, the pawn takes, and if takes, check, and then the king has to actually move, and then boom, there goes the piece, the whole piece at that point. So if you're wondering about that, that's why that wasn't played. Knight to h6. Now the knight removed a critical critical attacker of the f4 square. This was vital move. Knight takes, and then bishop takes h. The bishop made a promise to f4 on move 14, but now, for the reason that are hard to fathom, it's forgotten about its vow and allowed itself to be removed from the board. But yeah. So basically, what Jeremy Silman's doing is he's commentating as if he's the squares of the board, the weak squares of the board, and these weak squares of the board do talk to us. I know you're thinking, whoa, what are you saying? That the board actually talks? Yes, the board does talk. It's kind of funny, but then you say, but it's an inanimate object. It doesn't talk to me. All I see is squares and pieces on the board. Yes, when you go to the next level of understanding on how chess is set up, these squares, when you push a pawn, these squares will cry out saying, I need help. And what'll happen is you'll start, let's say you're playing as black, you'll say, hey, this square is undefended. You mean if I take this, you could think of a square as a little town. If I take this little town here, or settlement, that it'll help my position? You mean I could have a entrenchment there and basically hold and cause some damage without being attacked? Yeah. And so you'll take that little town, which is the square, our settlement, and then you'll be able to outpost there. And you have to look at it like that. You have to be able to envision that the chessboard is a world. Every move affects the cities, which are the squares as I like to call them, And these soldiers defend these important cities. When one is gone, and like maybe they have to send military in, the bishop to cover that, so that the enemy can't outpost there and then set up a barricade and cause a lot of problems for you. King H7, then F4, and E5. An excellent move. The C5 square has made it personally basically it's saying you're not to the knight. The C4 pawn is saying to the knight here, to this knight, you will not be able to access B5 or D5. I am not going to let you in there. Yeah, that the B7 knight by D4. So black will wisely try to remove that that barricade, that blockader. F takes, D takes, and then D5. Knight to C5. And this is what he says: the eagle has landed. The eagle has landed on the top of its domination of the C4 square. The knight is also eyeing D3, a square that was once defended by the C and E pawns can see in review the minuses of the drawbacks of pushing, but can never be touched. So these squares here eye this square here, but they can never stop it from they can't protect it or kick that piece out, because they just can't. It's just one of those things. They're in it for the long haul. The weakness of our three squares, C5, D3, and F4, begin to play a key role in this game. Queen E2, Queen E7, Bishop to F5, King G7. Because the nice tactical idea is this here. That's mate. Just amazing how Kappa could spot these tactical brilliancies, and his opponents just are like shocked when they see it. Rook H8, Rook G3, Rook H6, Queen E2, or E3, Queen S6, H to G1, King H7, Rook to G5 at this point. He takes here. If they tried to avoid that by playing here, I'm thinking Kappa would have just probably I'm not sure what he would have played here. Let me see. Yeah, rook. Oh yeah, queen play is interesting. Yeah. So basically, with that move, G takes, rook takes F. Now he's attacking the queen. Queen E7, and queen to f3 with the idea of ganging up on that pawn. f6, rook takes h5. Now this threatens mate, so you see that for sure. Knight takes knight to e3 check. Black's knight wants to single-handedly take all the squares. White has to let the knight have its way, since queen takes would lose a rook. So queen takes would actually lose a rook. This would right here lose a rook. You see that, of course. King d1, knight f4. Continuing its journey, the busy basically knight jumps back to white's aid and tries to end the game. So check here. King takes. Queen g3. Rook c8. And then queen to and queen to c5. A fitting end to black's queen also makes use of the hole on c5. Hopefully this game made you more aware of the potential danger of pushing a pawn. Of course, pushing your pawns and creating squares that might prove weak later in the game is unavoidable. The key here is to awareness. As long as you know the downside of every pawn advance, you'll be able to better judge whether or not such a square will or not such a square will really to be a problem as the game proceeds. Will really to be a problem? Is it ready? Oh, really only to be a problem as the game proceeds. So basically what he's saying, I don't know if that's the right to pronounce it, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, or maybe you never know. Sometimes those are kind of word breaking things. But what you have to remember is what he's saying, the concept is what we're going after, rather than the perfection of all reading. Sometimes is the concept that he's saying is that we have to understand that every pawn move, again, like what we talked about, always has a weakness. It's a drawback. It leaves something behind. And as long as we know that, and we push a pawn, it can really become a weakness later on in the game. But we have to always make sure that we're aware that every pawn move has a drawback. I know I repeated that again, but it's important. It really is. You gotta be 100% when it comes to understanding when you push a pawn. There's no move. There's no going back. Like a piece can go back, but a pawn cannot go back. Okay, d4, knight f6, c4, d5, c5, d6, a4. The banco. The classic banco. I'm thinking maybe you might be able to grab this pawn here. Something like this. It's not as strong than a pawn fall, so he's got to be on guard. This should be 7, rook e1, knight g4, queen e2, knight g to a5, knight takes, bishop g, rook a e1, or rook, let's see, a e8, oops, not d8, e8, f4, knight d7, queen f3, a6, a4, d8, rook e2, and we are looking at a typical banco pawn structure. White central space advantage is obvious, and so is his plan to advance e4 to e5 and perhaps onward to e6 if can be. At the moment, black has prevented this, but the simple rook a e1 will give the e5 pawn a green light. Go. What can black do to stop his opponent's idea in its tracks? c4. Black put a weakness that he never really knew. White never knew that he had a d6 or I appreciate your patience on that he had the d3 square. This is a natural result of c2 to c4 and then e2 to e4 move, which left d3 without a natural pawn defender. Now knight d7 to c5 to d3 is a real threat, as shown by the following variations. So like rook d1, knight c5, e5, knight d3, now e6, takes, and then d takes, queen b6, check, and white is actually losing here. Surprisingly, the game is almost over. Bishop to f2 was actually played in the game. That covers that square from the knight trying to get in. The bishop steps back to stop knight c5, this square here. However, by doing this, he also took the bishop away from e5, making his own advantage harder to acquire. Queen a5. Rook to d1. And then b5 here. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what about this, right? And then this could actually happen, and then it's game, set, and match. So that's why b5 got moving. A takes b, a takes b, rook e7. This is actually a mistake by white. Black has made a visual gain over the last few moves. Rook e1, which is form of basically an emotional surrender, allows him to get a firm grasp of the initiative. Now, however, white liked it or not, he had to follow through with his own plan via this one move here. This move has to be played. It's an exclam move. It sacks a pawn, but it has to be played. And then f5 exclam. It sacrifices one pawn, but it's a vital sacrifice. b4, knight e4. When the small price of a pawn, white has created some play of his own on this point. But this is too passive. It's surrendering the game. Rook a8, rook d2, b4, knight d1, knight to d1, rook f to e8. A good, solid move, very much in Donaldson's. He never gives his opponent counterplay in his style. This is kind of black is Donaldson, and he never gives counterplay to his opponent. This is a solid move. That continues to deny white his plan of e4 to e5 pawn push while also putting a bit of pressure on e4. Another way to handle the position potentially would have been knight to c5, bishop takes c5, queen takes c5 check, queen f2, rook f to c8, queen takes, and then rook takes. White faces some serious problems. So there's got to be some stitches in the position. Bishop d3, d6. White has clearly, White was clearly worse, but he's lost now with this move. But now he's lost. As bishop takes, rook takes, and then queen c5. Queen f2. Rook a1. Black has many good choices. Perhaps the best was actually this move here, c5, or c2 to c4. B takes, b takes, rook e2, knight f8, r6, h3, knight takes, exclam, rook d takes, e4, rook takes, queen takes, d takes, rook takes, and then c2. And it's all over. King f1, right here, queen d2, g4, h, and then knight to e5. This is a exclam. Excuse me. That was good. Let's see how we're doing here. Perfect. We'll be able to finish this one and do a quick summary on it before we have to wrap up. We're doing good. So e5. Very nice. White has stopped the knight from reaching d. This is what he says. Kind of in a joking matter. White had stopped the knight from reaching d3 from c5, but the bishop by bishop f2. However, he never imagined that the knight would find its way to d3 by this route. Queen to e3. It's kind of interesting. You'd think, whoa, look at that's nice. There's no spot now for the rook to retreat to. If you retreat here, the pawn takes. So if you play there, then you have check. So the only move is that to attack the knight with the pawn. But now the knight made its way in, and basically it's game, set, and match here. Rook takes d, and queen takes. D take. Hold on. King d2. Rook to d8. Knight g4. c3, c takes, and then b3. white lost on time in this scenario. Because there's really no way to, I don't think there's a way to hold here. Because if, so this is completely winning for black. And we'll just do that. I think if king here, then all, you would probably take there. Well, no, you wouldn't want to take there. You'd probably play over here. So maybe not. Because if he takes here, well, interesting. If he takes there, then you could actually play here. I could see where there's potentially still playing the game, and he just lost on time. Let me see. Yeah, there's still, and so that was sad. I was lost on time there. Okay, so what did we learn from today? We always have to have a summary of what we talked about. What we learned today was that squares have voices in chess, and you have to kind of make it a personal thing, that when you look at a square, it's like a city, and each one of those pawns that you have in the first or the second rank or the seventh rank for black are guarding little cities. And when one is given up and the enemy can take it, then they can outpost there and cause a lot of problems. Squares will say, I need protection. Like when a player plays a move, you got to ask yourself this one question: why did they do that? And what if I push a pawn? You can also say to yourself when you push pawns, if I push a pawn, what am I giving up, and what am I allowing my opponent later on to use as an advantage against me? And that's one thing that we have to always be prepared to do, is like what Jeremy Silva says, it's unavoidable. You're going to lose a pawn. I mean, not pawn, you're going to lose squares by pushing pawns. And it's just how it is. But if the goal of a chess player is to maximize the minimum amount of squares being lost by pawns. So if you can remember to maximize the minimum amounts of loss, but maximize the potential of gain for you, then you're fine. And that's kind of what I always think of, is when I'm pushing a pawn, what am I giving up, but what am I gaining in the long run? So it's a give and take. Even I think it was Bobby Fischer even says, you have to give a little, you have to give something to get something. That's basically that principle that Bobby was talking about. You have to give something to get something. Nothing's free but the salvation of Jesus Christ. So you have to always keep that in your forefront. And we even take that for granted sometimes, the grace and mercy that He's given us. So we always have to never do that. And so I think we've wrapped up that squares have voices. We understand now what we need to do. make sure when you push a pawn that you're not just pushing it for pushing sake. Make sure it has a point and it has a great victory, or it gives you something more than what you lost. Remember what Bruce Lee says: take the information, the summaries that we went over, what we talked about, the boards. If you want to go over our section again, my tag on Lichess is business law, and you can go and look up and go over the studies. And if it'd be appreciated if you gave it a heart, but if not, just enjoy, learn, and improve. And remember to treasure your victories, learn from your losses, and remember that mistakes do not define who you are. It's how you handle the mistake that defines who you are. What they're saying about that is always remember that if you're not always going to be perfect right off the bat, practice makes perfect. And remember one thing that we just talked about: giving up a square. When you push pawn, you give something up. There's one thing that we always talk about, is that it's important that you receive the Lord Jesus, Lord and Savior. That's the gift of eternal life, and it's given freely. So there's nothing that you have to do to get that. So just keep that in your forefront, that it's not by our works, it's by what he did and paid for us. So, and that's what the Team Chess Cruncher motto is about when we study chess. Is we hang up our coats, we hang up our hats, we sit down and study when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does, and that makes all the difference. As Wesley So says, serve the Lord Jesus. As I say, God bless. And I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening. Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow. We'll keep pushing forward, onward and upward, and we're going to keep learning. Remember, though, what Hannibal Smith said: even inside of a random position, my friends, there's always a plan. A weak square, something. There's always a plan. When you find it, and I know you will, you get to say, I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Hoorah. Be blessed. I will see you tomorrow, and we will keep pushing forward, learning about pawns and squares. Bye-bye, team. Hoorah. Go Team Chess Cruncher. Bye-bye.